The book that I wrote, the title of it is, it's got a Cree and an English title. Opimotewina Wina Kapagamawat Witigowa. That's the Cree, that's the Swampy Cree title. And Opimotewina is journeys. Wina is of the one. And then Kapagamawat to strike. And Witigowa is the object that he's going to strike. That's in Cree, it is the one he's going to strike. And over here in translation in Swampy Cree, it's called Witigo. It's the same as this, but it's just that this one is more a grammatical term in Cree. That's the way you would say it in Cree. This is the way you would say it in English. Journeys are the one to strike the Witigo. So that's the title of this book. And I'm the author of it. And I've got pictures, lots of pictures in this book, family pictures, over the years that I were part of. And in the picture, you will see my brother Franklin here, Paul Ducian, who helped my father Pierre Carriere to land this great big sturgeon, which weighed about 150 pounds, something like that. Really big fish anyway. They had to wrestle it into the canoes that, the freighter canoes that they were using for their commercial fishing. That's what happened there. And that's the photo. Okay. So I'm going to start reading about this book. And I'm going to have to change glasses here for reading. Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you introductory comments on this. Writing this book has made my wish to be a writer. When I graduated from high school in June of 1969, I told my parents I was interested in writing as a profession. I would go to university to learn the craft. My parents were practical people. They bought me a typewriter to get started. When I got to university, I decided to study geology. I followed the advice that studying science or engineering offered better jobs. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1974. And in the 70s, geology was a new science with jobs in soft rock, fossil fuel, or hard rock, base metals exploration and mining. And the exploration for new minerals was very big in different parts of northern Canada. Came to northern Saskatchewan in 1977 to work with Uraners and the Saskatchewan Mining Development Corporation in uranium exploration. I left my work in mineral exploration. I studied education at NORTEP, the Northern Teacher Education Program, and graduated the Bachelor of Education from the University of Saskatchewan in '84. I have spent a good part of my life here in this La Ronge area. The longer I stay, the more I know about this land here. My visits to the Opimotewina Sand Cliffs is a rock exposure of the Cretaceous age. It is a geological period that lasted from about 145 to 66 million years. It's way back in the past. A sandstone formation that was deposited in a mid-continent seaway. The mid-continent seaway, the continent being North America. The same rock formation extends from the Arctic coast of Hudson Bay to tropical Florida. Anyways, I get out on the land by hiking, paddling a canoe, driving a vehicle, propelling a 19-foot aluminum square stern canoe with a small motor. I include landscape viewing, weather forecasting, using the living sky and internet weather maps, photography, measuring water depths, camping, hunting, fishing, herb and berry picking as part of my travels. I have accompanied my brother Franklin to his trapline northeast of Montreal Lake. I hiked on his trapline that was clear cut of trees about 25 years ago. I felt I was walking on sacred ground. Even though the forest was gone in many places, I sensed that many generations of people had been on those forested lands. I envisioned them gathering berries from the forest floor and medicinal herbs in the wetlands. They were hunting moose, caribou, bear, rabbits, grouse, catching fish and ducks in the creeks and lakes. I would say that was their very own heaven or Kitsikisiko. Now I'll comment on the certain chapters from my memoir, which is, like I said, titled The Journeys of the Winter Strike the Wetigo. I'm going to start with part one, On the Land and in the Sky. There's two parts to the book. And that first chapter that shows up is called Of Witigos and War. I was told of the indigenous soldiers who took part in the Second World War. Most of them came from small settlements and reservations surrounding nearby towns in our province. Their hunting skills to get moose or elk were invaluable. Many of them fought on the front lines, hunting the enemy with their high-powered rifles. That's what happened to my father. He was a skilled moose hunter, a wolf with a trigger finger. There were four brothers who enlisted. Three joined the war effort on a battlefield, and one was a reservist in Halifax, Nova Scotia. My dad was the last to join. He fought on the front lines in France as a sniper. He was the first brother to come home after he was released from an army hospital in England. His second wound, that sniper's bullet, struck his jawbone and his face drooped to one side. His comrades who fought with him said he had reached the rank of a field sergeant. He led his fighters into different missions. In his second wounding, he was put into a body bag. His comrades, Frank Chaboyer from Cumberland House and Edward Fast from Nipawin, saw that he was still alive. They hurriedly took him out of the body bag and carried him to a nearby Red Cross mobile unit. When Dad got home, he was experiencing shell shock or PTSD. Sometimes he woke up in the early daybreak hours. He was seen by his younger sisters crouching and running around the buildings. He looked like he was hunting for the Nazi German soldiers. They felt sorry for him, for my mother and their child, Anne. Mom was greatly impacted by her husband's traumatic mental condition. Then it had to be her who helped him to turn his life around. In their return from their war effort, Canada's Indigenous warriors went back to their home communities to begin their lives again. My dad joined the others and went to Katatskak for spring muskrat trapping. He also joined the cooperative movement of the fisheries and fur marketing of the Western Canadian producers. This return to the land was a spiritual awakening for those who fought in that modern day war. They witnessed what military might can do to entire countries. In the winter of 2022, 2023, at this northern latitude of Canada, if you didn't hibernate like a bear, our usually cold winter month, January was mild, single digit daytime temperatures. You didn't need to go to Mexico or Arizona or the Caribbean island or a Caribbean island to escape the cold. Just stay in Saskatchewan and enjoy the winter. And now, should this be a sign of climate change, then our winters could be Pacific coast mild to Siberian deep freeze. And that could happen. In this chapter, I wrote a poem. I wrote it in a mild and cold winter in 2018. And the title is Witigo, Raising Hell and High Water. And just to let you know, poetry or songs are common people's self-expression and to reveal certain truths. I hope I can do it justice. I'll read it to you now. And there's a picture of my father in his army outfit. Yeah, that's what he looked like before he went to war. But if you had seen him later on, like I said, his jaw was busted up so badly that his face drooped to one side. And there are pictures of him later on, and just before he passed away. I'll show you that picture if I could find it right away here. Now, there's this picture of him in the hospital just before he died. And you could see where his jaw dropped. Jaw dropped quite a bit. And so anyway, I'm going to read a poem here. Witigo, Raising Hell and High Water. Witigo has found the fossilized remains of the ancient Earth in buried basins at the heart and head of Turtle Island. Witigo will bring that buried fossil fuel to surface. This will make money to feed hungry machines. Witigo can always buy time before digging. Once dug up, that fossil fuel will be in its hands. Witigo is sucking blood at the heart of Turtle Island. Soon it will reach the arteries of Mother Earth, making them steam, gurgle, bulge, and sputter, fed by pressurized water pumped down to her. Mobile melted rock can move anywhere. Following loosened arteries, molten rock creeps up. Once it finds a passageway to the surface, it will drive the lava smashing through the upper crust. It may arrive at the surface like a ginormous solar flare. Witigo knows the inner workings of a magma chamber, endangering all the living creatures on Mother Earth. Erupting volcanoes change everything right now. Witigo is sucking blood at the head of Turtle Island. There are massive ice sheets on top of Arctic oil fields. Everything is full steam ahead to bring up the fossil fuel. Open the ice flow lanes of ships carrying crude to market. This will advance the melting of a continental ice sheet. Witigo saw coastal flooding and said, "Too freaking bad." Witigo tastes the future. All we can tell is what it never had. Its spirit screams, "Nobody can know when a volcano will blow." Climate catastrophes come and go. So shut the hell up. Witigo will stay this way until everything is gone. When you idle so much, worries of Witigo go on. Take care of your health, your husky, your horse. Then with your strength and good heart, move on. Well, that's a poem that I wrote just about who this character is. And we know a few characters like that are always sputtering like that. Anyway, chapter No Fear, Stay Calm. In the previous chapter, I started off by writing that my dad was fearless. He went to fight in the World War II in Europe. He knew the danger, but faced it anyway. In this trip to Nameu Lake, which is a deep lake with power currents and wind waves, he took the trip without a second thought of facing the most powerful wind that could make the Nameu Lake waves look like rolling mounds. I was just sitting in front of that 20-foot square stern painted canvas covered canoe. When we crossed Nameu Lake to Sturgeon Landing, I looked over the bow to face the waves. I was just a child, I was just a kid, and I got very frightened. On the downslope side, the bow was rushing to the trough. The bow of the boat was rushing to the trough of the wave. It looked like we were going to go under and would end our trip. Then the canoe climbed up on the upslope to the crest. This went on, wave after wave. I was too scared to look over the bow, seeing all that water rushing towards me. I turned around and covered myself with a tarp. Then I watched my dad. He calmly kept driving wave over wave until we reached Sturgeon Landing. I had to tell my mom about this adventure at Nameu Lake. Then she told me about her adventures on Amisk Lake, another lake like this one, just north of Nameu, where she grew up with her family. Her dad, Dougal McKenzie, had gone there to earn a living and had his orphaned children with him. A local chief had a daughter who was not married. He gave his daughter to marry my grandfather. Her name was Christiana Custer, Cursiter. She helped them. She helped them to raise the ones who were still at home. Then they had their own children. My mother learned to live off the land. Christiana taught her that way of living, the home life. Um, her dad, uh, her dad Dougal, taught her how to look after working dogs and horses, to find and use natural medicines, to tan moose hide and preserve fish. She also created beautiful beadwork on moose hide she tanned. Her story is about traveling on Amisk Lake just before freeze up, and I'd like to read you that story. And I titled it "We Will Drown Together." And I'll read it in Korean English. And the title of this story is "Kamamawe Nista Pawano." We will drown together. Uh, this is a poem that I decided to, not my poem, but it's a story, and it sounds like almost like a poem. My mother was telling me the story, but you come across it, and then you come across where she's actually talking about her father, because she's a child and she's recalling her childhood, and then she explains what he did. So anyway, iguane ka misagayak se magi guttaweo i paga siganigeo tawanik. When we arrived on shore, he made a campfire right away. He made bannock over the campfire. Na matwigas nigi sipi iskate gonan, nigi minupamigonan. He never spoke in anger to us. He took good care of us. Tiama tawene pego pigigwa, even though he was raising us by himself, or he was alone raising us. I've translated it into from Cree to English. It's the way it would be read. It would translate. Ego speak this time as we were traveling, Amiskusaga Eganik on Beaver Lake, Amisk Lake. Megots eti yagatik gigistenipaneu sugaga maskau. Well, it was freezing over. It got very windy. The waves were powerful. Nigisegisinanin na nawasak. Naganipitigo nan mis tipago asun. Tonea emas kamipanik. The waves were, we were scared as children. He covered us with a big canvas tarp. The water just iced up as it dropped inside the boat. This is what your late grandfather said to us. Kispin kigatapaugo now, atawena kamamawinsta pawa now. If our boat capsizes, it will not matter since we will drown together. And I wrote that in 1993. My mother told me that story. And I often thought about that story. I said, how poetic that was. So much poetry in that one story. So I had to bring it into my book. So that is about chapter No Fear, Stay Calm. As if I would not fear that lake. I fear that lake. I've been to the Amisk Lake without even a wind, and I could feel the power of the water at that far end towards Cumberland Lake. There's a lot of power in that lake. It's deep, and then moves the waves, or the water just moves. So my next chapter is called Chichiganik and the Big Bend. In late July to early August, there was a fishery for goldeye, walleye, sauger, pike, and sturgeon. My dad went to a place where the South Angling River joins up with the Central Angling, which is now named on Google Maps the Saskatchewan River. There is a history for this changing river regime at the upper Saskatchewan River Delta. My dad did his commercial fishing there. I was his helper then. We camped overnight at the big bend called Chichigan's place, and it was actually David Goulet's trap line. We stayed in a tent on a sandbar with a willowed shoreline, and we set sturgeon nets and other fish nets nearby. We caught pounds of fish daily for about a week or two. The fish fed on minnows, crustaceans, and shrimp that came from the nearby Muskeg Lake. Muskeg Lake kind of not does not exist anymore. It's been kind of taken over by there was a kind of another lake that set up in there called Dumbbell Lake, and it kind of got backed up by a dike on one side, and the water flows in from the upstream end, and it's still a fairly big lake, and it's got it's kind of enclosed. It was set up by the Ducks Unlimited. They decided that they needed to do that, I guess. But anyway, they did it. Chapter Muskrats at Salt Lake. As a youth, what interested me of the spring muskrat trapping at Salt Lake was the traveling there by dog team and camping in a prospector's tent on the snow and ice. I didn't know that I was traveling with expert dog team travelers and winter campers. My dad and brother Franklin had been doing this together for many winters already. I learned of muskrat behavior during Minuskamin, spring breakup. I was doing land-based education while muskrat trapping. When I did my research for this book, my brother John educated me about indigenous place names. On a current map of Salt and Willow Lakes, Salt and Willow Lake, these lakes are named McGregor Lakes. I asked John who was McGregor. He told me that he was a Second World War veteran who was killed in action. In 1947, the Saskatchewan government gave unnamed lakes on maps the names of World War II and Korean War Saskatchewan soldiers who were killed in action. My editor, David McLennan, at the University of Regina Press, wrote that Willow and Salt Lakes had been named after two brothers, Alexander and David McGregor, who were killed in the Second World War. The local trappers gave the lakes, their original names. The Hudson Bay Company fur lease managers then knew the lakes as Willow and Salt Lake. Chapter Kiskamisko, Saragan. That's so easy to say, Kiskamisko. But after a while, you pick it up. Cut Beaver Lake. This was a commercial fishing venture. When fish were abundant in the old channel, Dragline Canal, and Cut Beaver Lake, the commercial fishery there didn't last very long after the two hydroelectric power dams out upstream were in full operation. I got to meet some famous wilderness adventurers and indigenous fishers. One of them, Ed LeClaire, was a bush pilot. Leroy Royer, a government fish biologist. He was studying the moon eye and gold eye fish at Cut Beaver Lake. My uncle Jim, Carriere, moose, and waterfowl hunter, fisher and trapper as well. John Baptiste La Liberty, moose and waterfowl hunter, fisher, trapper, and champion marathon canoe racer. Used to do some really heavy duty paddling. Anyway, the other one chapter is Mossy River Camp. This tourist outfitting camp is still active. It provides guiding service for moose, bear, and duck hunters, angling for walleye and pike. In spring and summer, it offers experiences for land-based education. Our visit to this camp was a work and vacation for our family. We went there to get the camp ready for the fall outfitting season. It is an excellent hunting area for waterfowl, moose, and bear. That's what Mossy River Camp did have. Chapter again, do you feel the spirit of a moose? I went on a summer moose hunting canoe trip with my great uncle Albert Flett. I was about 12 years old. First time I wondered whether animals had a spirit or a soul. When we were paddling over the flooded moose pastures on the west side of Pine Island, Albert asked me in Cree, Kimatsustawa na Musa. In my limited Cree, I thought he was asking me, do you feel the soul or spirit of a moose? This was such a big question for me. We were told in our Christian teachings that only humans have a soul or a spirit, animals don't. Then the indigenous knowledge keepers tell us humans can have animals as spirit helpers. If an animal is a spirit helper, shouldn't that animal have a spirit? Indigenous spiritual teaching in the Americas provide an understanding that certain landforms, such as mountains, rivers, canyons, and volcanoes, have spirit. These places are known as sacred places. In certain countries, rivers are given a status as personhood. In those countries, them rivers are protected from pollution and environmental degradation. Chapter, Little Cumberland. When the province decided to build hydroelectric power dams on the Saskatchewan River and the South Saskatchewan River, they needed workers. Then they provided construction work for the Cumberland House trappers, fishers, and hunters. My brothers Franklin and John joined the rest of the Cumberland House workers. Cabins and shacks were then built by the workers near the job site to house their families. This place was known as Little Cumberland. That's like Little Cumberland House because the people came from Cumberland House to work there. The Saskatchewan River Hydroelectric Project was known as the Squaw Rapids Dam. The name of the original Squaw Rapids Dam, Squaw Rapids, was later renamed to E.B. Campbell Dam. Squaw is an anglicized derogatory term from the Cree word isqueo and in Ojibwe ikwe. The English wording was used to denigrate Indigenous women in North America. How did that name change come about? John Dorian, also known as Johnny Poirier, originally from Cumberland House, pushed for the renaming. The effects of the hydro dams operations upstream to the delta downstream were immediate, like turning a tap on and off as you need the water. During the winter months, the tap is turned on full for the hydroelectric usage. Highest electricity usage. Result is the water flow downstream rises above the frozen rivers and lakes. It drowns and freezes the beavers and muskrats. Muskrats who have built their winter homes in the floodplain. When a drought comes to the prairies, or when the southern Saskatchewan and Alberta use more water for their petroleum producing economy, when more irrigation is needed for the grain growers and the reservoirs provide that water, the result of that is the Saskatchewan River Delta downstream gets a trickle of water. Show a picture here. It was taken by the late Ron Mackay. He was a conservation officer in Cumberland House, stationed there for 5 years, and he's archived at the Pianist Library in Iran. This, again, was a result of the Saskatchewan River Hydro Dam initial operation. It had just begun filling in the Tobin Lake Reservoir, and the amount of water coming downstream was at its lowest. So I'll show you that photograph. Okay, this photograph was taken right on the Big Stone River, and you'll notice the buildings on the top. You'll notice the buildings on the top are sitting on the along the bank, on top of the bank, and down here you'll see a whole bunch of boulders and mostly limestone type of rock, limestone boulders on the bottom. And that is the river, once the river bottom. And my brother John told me that the pickerel or the walleye used to spawn there, along with the sauger, and that's where they spawned. I guess that's lay down their eggs along that, and this is what it looked like right after the Tobin Lake Reservoir was filled. It's immediately upstream. So there was just a trickle of water coming, and then this place, Big Stone River, used to be well, I'll show you another picture. Gives you an idea how much water was in it. Or flowing through the Big Stone. I'm pretty sure I have this photo somewhere here. This photo here, it's on top of the bank, and then you could see how much water was on that. This is the Big Stone River, and this is Paul Dosian with his another big sturgeon. They used to catch some really big sturgeon on the Saskatchewan River. So there's this sturgeon, and in the background, that's the Big Stone River when it was flowing nicely from Cumberland Lake all the way to the Saskatchewan River at what's called the Big Stone River cutoff. So here's what we have here. So that's the story of that, what happened there. Going back to waterfowl hunting in the early 1960s, the upper Saskatchewan River was a major staging area of many species of migrating geese and swans. When you talk about a staging area of waterfowl, they're literally there in the thousands when they come in and stage. So anyway, that's what happened. The disappearing Oxbow Lakes and the main lake called Pine Island Lake or Cumberland Lake no longer provide the big flocks their preferred habitat. The big birds fly past and prefer the grain fields near Tobin Lake and Cadet Lake, a reservoir for the Nipawin hydro dam. In the 60s, my dad operated 2 waterfowl and moose hunting outfitting camps. I spent time with him as he went waterfowl hunting. I learned how to set up decoys, where to hide nearby, and do the voice box bird calling. Back then, we didn't use bird callers. We use them now. And when we forget to pack them in our hunting gear, should you make an approximate call, you can still fool the lonely goose who lost their mate. I did some waterfowl hunter guiding. I never did moose hunting guiding. All my brothers did, and I know that they are very good moose hunters. The south end of next chapter, the south end of Egg Lake. In Larange area, there is an egg lake west of Big Stone Lake. The Cree name for Egg Lake is Manawan Sagaigan. Cree speakers say Wawe for egg and Wawa for eggs. A Cree language learner might ask, how come you say Manawan for egg? The Cree word Manawan or Manawan is derived from the verb to manao, to go gather. That verb, when then uses a noun, wawa, for what is to be gathered, to describe a place where eggs are gathered. The Cree say, Itaka manao wak wawa. When Cree speakers shorten that phrase to Manawan, then the Cree speakers will shorten that phrase to Manawan. Instead of saying Itaga manan wak wawa, they would say Manawan. That's what I'm trying to tell you here. Credo English translation for this lake describe it as that place where you go gather eggs from ducks. You may think this is not a good conservation practice. Then female ducks lay more eggs to make up for the gathered eggs. So long as the egg gatherers place a limit to allow the poor mother duck to lay enough eggs to raise more ducks. In this chapter, I describe my trip on Egg Lake at the Saskatchewan River Delta, south of the Saskatchewan River and north of the Opaskwayak Hills, using dog teams to get on the lakes and rivers and get a good workout on them. And you get a good worker as a dog musher. I describe how fresh bannock and hot tea is so refreshing when you arrive, and I've been invited into a camp. So I'll read a poem that I wrote about a woman that was there working. She was working with her husband, and their son and daughter were there too, and they were doing their spring trapping, muskrat trapping, and they were camped. And her name was a Sagewin. And the Sagewin, to our language, it means feast. Iguane pego esigo nigi wicheo autagutawian egi Saskatchewan Book. This one spring, I went with my late father. We were muskrat trapping across the Saskatchewan River. At Opimotewina Wina Kapagamawat. We used dogs. They were strong pullers. Tansimina, Kaisnawak, Ita, Ita, Kagiti, Itsayak, Peganma, Isnawak, Wasagami Tapian. How did it look like where we drove the dog teams? It looked the same all around the lake where I was looking. Pinisa Tawina, Kati, Piskigo Park, Ati Piskigo Park, Iguane, Katu Titamak, Pitige stick a CP. At last there were willow bluffs. Then we arrived at an opening of a river. Pamatesagapa tawek, awina, tegi manugetita. Spiget tegi se ayapastemea, nigi pitiwanan paganigamigok. There was a smoke. Someone's camp is here. After we finished unharnessing the dogs, we went inside the tent. Gutame got a sage when kagitit. Sugit ta tas tasipawat was Taskawayana. There now was Feast, as she was named, busily stretching the muskrat skins. Kimisagana, wow. Oh, hey, mes tinigi saga missigan. Mitagamente, nigwek, pasiche nigi gigiswa pagwesigan, megots tagapil. You have arrived. Oh, hey, I've boiled water. There's lots of tea. Have a drink. And I have baked bannock right now. It is cooling. Tapengi giminu tagosu. Tapegi minu tagosu. Nigi no tegatana. Tapegi igatsuana pagwesigan. She sure sounded good. We were hungry. It sure tasted good, that bannock. So that's a whole I wrote for arriving at a camp. And this this painting that I did shows my father with his big jumper sled, and he's got 5 dogs, and me, I'm in the back following his dogs because he knows where he's going. Tell the dogs where to go. And if you look up front, it looks like an ocean up front. There's something sticking out in the horizon. It did really, literally look like that when I first got there. I didn't know which way I would go, but he knew which way to go, so he just told the dogs to go where there. And like I said, he was really knew how to drive dogs. So I'm just following along. I've got 3 dogs, and I've got the traps in an Alaska sled, and he's got the jumper sled that was made by Joe T. Dorian, put together with steel runners and all that, so he could drive right over the ice. And it was the thing about this picture again, it's got the 5 dogs, the 3 dogs, and you got a number 8. Number 8 is a really interesting number. So anyway, just to let you know that. And then when we were out there in the trapping, he told me to always carry this ice testing tool called a Michigo. Carry it in front of you and test the ice as you walk around. And so naturally, after a while, I was going around. I wasn't testing the ice. I was having that slung over my shoulder, and I was going along, and then all of a sudden, this thing happened, and I got it portrayed in this painting. I fell through what is called a breathing hole for, and actually where the muskrats would store their food, their plants and stuff that they eat, the plants they eat, I mean. And then there's, I figure maybe 3 houses were feeding off that one air hole. Anyway, I fell through the ice there, and then I wasn't carrying that Witigo properly at that ice testing, and it's lying on the beside me there, and I was in the water, couldn't feel the bottom. I had to pull myself out of there. And my 3 dogs there sleeping over there, they could care less what's going on. They're not going to come to my rescue. So anyway, and here's the number. You could see I've got 4. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 pointing to 4 muskrat houses. 4 over here, somewhere over there. It's 4 more. You got 8 muskrat houses. And if you count the clouds up here, the little clouds that were up on, and you could count 8 again. So it goes back to the number 8, the power of 8. And in the distance now we're closer to the Paskria Hills. And those hills really do, you kind of see them up close there from where we were. So anyway, just point out a few things about these that you will see in the book. And it's what I pointed out. Okay, going back to that, a chapter on the sacred Grassberry River. Oh, I should mention about the power of 8. When I told my late sister Anne Carriere about these paintings and about those, why did those everything come in 8? There was not, I didn't do that purposely. This came about. And because I was with learning how to paint and being taught how to paint by spiritual people from the Laurens area here, the Indian band, they must have given me a sense of things there. I'm not sure how it went. But then when my late sister Anne Carriere was a writer, she told me about these paintings and she said that the number 8 is a power number. That 8 is a power number. And if you're, for example, if you want to do some like my Muschige in our language, if you want to do some prayers, the more people that you have do prayers with for someone who's sick or ill, and you want them to recover or come close to recovering, you will want to do prayers with more than one, not just you and someone else. Preferably it's 8. That's the intentions. And there's a book written about it. And I don't want to talk about a book, that other book. I'm going to talk about my book. Well, anyway, power number 8. Okay, on the sacred Grassberry, that's a chapter. This chapter describes a freighter canoe trip up the Grassberry River, Mascosiminis We were going upstream to Suggy Lake to do commercial fishing. The Grassberry River's headwaters start at Limestone Lake west of Anson Lake. And I was in a canoe with my great uncle Albert Flett and my brother Albert Flett and my brother John. I was in the bow as we pulled our way upstream. I remember how strong that current was. I had to be quick to keep the bow of the canoe from being swept sideways. Then downstream. In this journey, this part of the Grassberry River started flowing from Windy Lake, the easterly Twin Lakes, to Suggy Lake. At the calm waters of Windy Lake sat a big boulder. Since all canoes coming up to the commercial fishery were close together, I witnessed my first encounter with a long-held spiritual practice. Everyone in each canoe stopped beside the boulder to give an offering. It made me pay attention to such spiritual practices. That's when I started paying attention to them. Chapter, The Revered Moose. In this chapter, I write the Cree words for the vital organs of a moose. These organs are cooked to provide vitamins and minerals from which the indigenous people took their energy. I was told the moose kidneys were sometimes eaten raw, like Japanese eat sushi and Inuit eat raw seal meat. I also described my dad's moose hunting story that Franklin witnessed. What is special about this moose hunting story is when and how it was done. It was in winter while Franklin and my dad were driving dog teams on their trap line. When my dad spotted two moose feeding on top of the ridge as they came along a wooded shoreline at Windy Lake, using his 22 caliber rifle with a bolt action and a tube magazine that held 15 long rifle bullets, he decided to hunt a moose. I mentioned that my dad was like a wolf with a trigger finger. This is where he used the wolf's tactics of hunting moose by sneaking up from downwind to get close enough to make the kill. Here I describe how we got fresh moose meat during the summer months when I was a kid. Every summer, people from Pine Bluff, who were status Indians, would come into our settlement, and they would set up camp by the Big Stone River and the Cumberland Lake shoreline. My parents were non-status Indians. We were prohibited from hunting moose during the summer months and relied on the Pine Bluff status Indians to supply fresh moose meat. In those days, we had no electricity, therefore no fridges nor freezers. When moose meat was brought into the Pine Bluff camps, the moose meat was kept on racks above the smokehouses. All the Pine Bluff people knew my mom, Suminis. When I arrived to barter for the moose meat with salt, sugar, lard, tea, or coffee, I would say, my mom, Suminis, had sent me here to trade for moose meat. I would do the trade. I often went back to the camps to play with the boys my age. I remember the ones I got along with. One of them was David Moran. I learned that later he was my cousin from my great uncle Joe Moran, my grandmother Agnes Moran's brother. Joe Moran's my grandmother, Agnes Moran's brother. So David was Joe's grandson. I wrote a story about I remember David, who had a nickname Pigaloos. I would like to read that now. So, Pigaloos story. Pigaloos was his nickname. I don't know how he got that nickname. But anyway, there's a story about him. And I wrote it in Korean English. Pigaloos. You go on it, Pego. Any peak. You che meteo e mau. This one summer, I played with him many times, this person whom I'm talking about. His name was Piglos. He was from Pine Bluff. Ugite mana ni noche ni tutana. Company saga Pasqua sek Chige saga igani ego ministrigachaga sekinini we kapesiwen. We went all over the bushes, company bushes, Company Woods, the meadows along the shoreline, and the Pine Bluff People's Campsite. Egi mapame no tipene sisiwayak, paspetipi tigan negia pachita yak. We went about hunting birds, a slingshot we would use. Nigiskisen, ni Chewagan Spigelos, Mistaweni Nige Motigita, and Anotimik, Egi Papame Notiago, Pinesi Isak. I remember my little friend, Pigloos. We had a lot of fun in the bushes. We would go around killing birds. Iguane mana Utawanik, Kagi Chipatoa, Gokani, Kagi Nipa, Kagi ni Pega Iswa, Nistanane Giwiga Spoagok. Then at this campfire place, we would roast those that we killed for food, and we enjoyed eating them too. So that's about Pigloos. And the next three chapters are Lamb Air to Get Well, Go Home on Bombardier, My Father's Knowledge of the Southern Plains, and number 3, 1979. Those are the three chapters. When I got sick, Lamb Air to Get Well, Go Home on Bombardier, that's the chapter. When I got sick with appendicitis, I was medevac to the Paw, Manitoba, 50 miles away as the raven flies. There was a break in a snowstorm that allowed Lamb airplane services to take me to St. Anthony Hospital in the Paw. That's where he performed surgery to remove my ruptured appendix. After a week, they sent me home. There was a transport service by snow tracker over a winter bush trail from the Paw to Cumberland House. The locals call it the Bombardier. On my trip home after a week post-surgery, every jolt and bump the Bombardier took sent a bolt of pain to my belly. I took relief by holding onto the side of the bench, and as I sat on to hold myself up. Pain. My father's knowledge of the Southern Plains. Now that's the chapter. Kind of wondering how come my dad knew so much about the Southern Plains? Like, he's a bushman. He's way up north there. That's where he grew up. So anyway, this is what happened here. Is a testimony on how Métis or non-status Indians related to the history of Western Canada. He knew that the Métis and the Indian nations depended on the buffalo hunt. Then he met Métis farmers in southern Saskatchewan, Labret, near the Qu'Appelle Valley. Then too, his mother Agnes had attended the Labret Indian Residential School, and his wife Agnes had been sent to recover from TB at Fort San, to both places in the Qu'Appelle Valley, near Fort Qu'Appelle, in fact. When we drove down into the Qu'Appelle Valley in the winter, my dad said this is where the buffalo would come down to escape the prairie winter storms. I wonder how he knew that. It was in the early spring of 1978 when we took him to the Regina Veterans Hospital to get a pin placed on his remaining jawbone to hold up his drooping face. On February 26, 1979, I visited my parents on Cumberland House. I went there to see a partial solar eclipse with my father. He was still around to have visitors, and he was still well enough to have visitors and was still skinning fur pelts. Took time out to watch the eclipse with me from his driveway. Some people say celestial signs like eclipses do forecast impending events. My mother said after my dad passed away in July 1979, they should have fixed up his heart instead of his face. And there is a homage to Lena Stewart chapter, homage to Lena Stewart. My mom spoke highly of Lena Stewart and her husband, Johnny Stewart. The more I learned about Lena, made me decide to write a homage to her. Her uncle was Stephen J. Greenleaf, a medicine man from the Pine Bluff and Cumberland House communities. This homage I recovered from a stack of writing I kept. And I'd like to read that homage now. I heard about her. She was a Muskegee Isqueo medicine woman. She wanted to know who I was before I could introduce myself. I'm here with my mother, Sominus, I said. Then she smiled. I could tell by their conversation they were old friends. They had never said anything wrong of each other. We began our conversation while she cut moose ribs. She took great care to clean the bone fragments from the meat. She said, the sharp fragments are dangerous for small children. They are easy to swallow and can make someone very sick. Her hands held the meat like it was the most precious thing. Her wrinkled face smiled as she continued to cut and clean. I felt fortunate that I understood and spoke her language. I was thankful for my mother, who had such wise and beautiful friends. In Lena's voice, I heard no moral indignation. She said, it's not important what you do wrong. Sometimes, sometimes you do what is right. She had an answer for everything I asked her. On Opimotewina Wina, raising children with kindness and love, a mother will have her children coming back to see her. They passed on some old medicine stories to each other. Keeping a skunk in your house is healthy. The air is cleansed of germs. Whenever the scent rises from the skunk sack, only one thing to remember. A skunk is not a pet for everyone, just that one person. It can always sense if you're a nasty type. Don't try to pet one if you are mean. My mother told me when I was an infant. She gave me a drink. It was a mix of hot water and oil from a skunk scent bag. I never once suffered vicious colds as an infant. And chapter Uncle Roger's legacy. If you were to compare the men's athletes of the 60s, several would stick out as the best in their competitions. Uncle Roger Carriere was one of them. He grew up at Pine Bluff and Cumberland House. He learned to live off the land as a hunter, fisher, trapper, and outfitting guide. He lived in Carriere Portage, Manitoba. He worked on the Northern Manitoba CN Railway. He settled there with his wife, Olive Whitehead, from the Pasquak Cree Nation, and this is where they raised their family. Besides working for the railway, he ran a trap line not far from his home. He participated in marathon canoe racing in Manitoba and Quebec. Then he took part in the King Trapper competition in Northern Manitoba Winter Festivals. He held the King Trapper title for many years. And in 1967, Canada's centennial year, participated in the Rocky Mountain House to Montreal, Quebec canoe race with the Manitoba team. The Manitoba team finished in first place. When he retired from competitions, he became a cultural icon for the Indigenous peoples of Canada. He was introduced to a large American television audience when he joined the Sesame Street program. And where prayers are called upon, this part describes my Roman Catholic upbringing. My mother's spirituality and religious practice. My mom always wished she could find where her grandmother Jemima Hall was buried. Her aunt Mary Warren said her mother Jemima died at Grand Rapids, Manitoba, and was buried there. Then we went looking for my mom's grandmother's gravesite. We visited family friends who knew of her grandfather Bill Mackenzie. They also told her when the Grand Rapids Hydro Dam was built, some grave sites were flooded over. In this chapter, I also provide a view of my father's spirituality. In my opinion, my dad was even more immersed in Indigenous spirituality. I can only say that from stories he told us and what my mother knew. And so if I were to read 118 and 119, it'll give you my perspective. If you are interested in indigenous spirituality, consider finding knowledge keepers who will guide you into the rituals or practices. I, I could only advise that as a knowledge seeker, have an open mind and do follow protocol. So I'll read something about my father here on page 118, 119. Uh, as a uh, as a child, my father was aware of the Cree way of praying. I once heard him speaking about Cree spirituality and the practices of a respected elder at Pine Bluff. Uh, and the man, he was a medicine man, and he was named Sepenchek. His Christian name was Stephen Jake Greenleaf. My father had known Sepenchek him with reverence. With his older brother Alphonse, my father often went to watch Sepenchek as he went out to do his prayers at the edge of a large muskeg. This was a sacred place to Sepenchek, his altar to the universe, where he said in a very loud voice, is my Mustigewen Wina prayers. I have often wondered if witnessing these practices took my father into Sepenchek's spiritual realm, in which he quietly remained for the rest of his life. That was my thinking. There are other stuff about it, spirituality in the book that my father would have known and possibly practiced. But that's the one that I thought would be the. Now, there's a part two to this book, and it's drop by, don't be a stranger, something like that. Drop by part two, and in part two, this is where you can read interviews of my relatives who knew my parents. My cousins, Glenn Dubenak and Margaret Schweitzer, who live at Dinner Beach on the shores of Amisk Lake. They grew up at Creighton, Saskatchewan, a border town to Flin Flon, Manitoba. And they are my late aunt, Kate Catherine Mackenzie, and her husband, Mike Dubenak. These are their children, and these two grew up at Amisk Lake and still live there at Dinner Beach. My brothers, Franklin Cotter and John Victor Carriere, interviews were spoken in Cree and translated into English. They were involved with my father in the trapping, hunting, commercial fishing, and the outfitting of moose, bear, and waterfowl hunters. And in there too, my interviews with my aunties, Marie Louise Mackenzie and Elise Saiz, the younger siblings of the brothers who enlisted for the Canadian Armed Forces in World War II in Europe. I interviewed them in Cree and translated to English. I wanted them to tell me how their brothers had changed after returning from war. Their other brother, Roger Carriere, was too young to enlist. Now, Roger, though he became an ambassador for Indigenous peoples of Northern Canada, like he won the title of King Trapper Northern Manitoba Winter Festivals, was in the Voyager Canoe Power position for the 1967 Centennial Canoe Pageant, where his Manitoba team won that canoe race from Rocky Mountain House, Alberta to Montreal, Quebec. And he also participated in marathon canoe races in Manitoba and in Quebec. And that's what this book that what I provide, kind of it's a memoir of when I was traveling with my father, and the interviews was basically about what people knew about him. It was so good to get to know someone, even though you spend a lot of time with him. I did spend a lot of time with him, and I'm still impressed with what he was able to do after he had been severely wounded in the Second World War. And of course, thinking about war, nuclear war, nah, let's not have it. They'll kill everybody. Okay, that's it. That's my story.